There comes a moment in the soul's journey when something profound shifts in the darkness of your being. It is not announced with fanfare or celebration, but arrives like the first breath of dawn, quiet, inevitable, sacred. You feel it first, as a subtle loosening, as though invisible chains you didn't know you wore have begun to dissolve. The desperate reaching toward others for confirmation of your existence starts to soften. And in that softening, a different kind of light begins to emerge. This is the birth of the hermit's lamp, that inner flame that no longer flickers with the uncertainty of external winds. For so long, you have lived as a mirror, reflecting back what others wished to see, adjusting your brightness according to their comfort, dimming yourself when your authentic radiance proved too much for their eyes. But now, in the depths of your psyche, something ancient and wise stirs to life. The hermit archetype that Jung spoke of is not one of bitter withdrawal, but of conscious solitude, the sacred act of turning inward, not to escape the world, but to find the eternal wellspring that makes authentic engagement possible. You begin to understand that the validation you have sought so desperately in the faces of others was always meant to be discovered in the secret chambers of your own heart. This transformation feels like death and birth occurring simultaneously. The ego, the constructed self that has spent years performing for an invisible audience, begins to recognize its own exhaustion. The masks you have worn, each carefully crafted to earn love, approval, acceptance, start to feel heavy, foreign, like clothes that no longer fit the person you are becoming. In the quiet moments between sleep and waking, you sense it most clearly. A presence within that requires no external confirmation to know its own worth. This is not the arrogance of the ego, but the quiet dignity of the self, that deeper, more complete aspect of your being that Jung understood as the archetype of wholeness and meaning. The hermit's lamp illuminates a profound truth, that the cave you thought was isolation was actually incubation. Every moment of feeling unseen, unvalidated, unappreciated, was preparing you for this recognition that you have always been the light you were seeking. The flame that burns steady in your chest is not lit by others' approval, but by the simple, radical act of witnessing yourself with compassion. As this inner light grows stronger, you notice how differently you move through the world. Conversations no longer carry the desperate undertone of needing to prove your worth. Silences become comfortable rather than threatening. You begin to speak not to impress, but to express them. Sometimes you discover the most powerful expression is the choice to remain silent, holding your truth like a secret flame that needs no external fuel to burn bright. This is the beginning of your return to essence. The long journey home to the self you were before the world taught you to doubt. Your own inner knowing. The performing self does not die quietly. Like autumn leaves that cling desperately to branches even as the season demands their release. The false personas you have constructed resist their dissolution with the fury of something that believes its existence depends on being seen. But death, in the psychological realm, is never an ending, is always a doorway to something more true, more alive, more authentically you. You feel it first as a profound exhaustion that no amount of rest can cure. The endless rehearsal of who you think you should be becomes unbearable, like wearing a costume that has grown too small for your expanding soul. Every interaction requires such careful choreography, the right words, the right expressions, the right version of yourself to match what you believe others need to see. The energy it takes to maintain these elaborate facades begins to drain the very life force from your being. This is the negredo that the alchemists spoke of, the necessary, blackening the sacred putrefaction that must occur before any true gold can be born. Jung understood this as the dark night of the soul, where all the ego's strategies for earning love and approval must be composted into the rich soil from which authenticity can grow. You are not losing yourself. You are finally allowing yourself to be found. The personas begin to crack like old paint on weathered wood. The agreeable self that always says yes when your soul screams no. The impressive self that performs competence while drowning in insecurity. The charming self that entertains others while starving for genuine connection. One by one, these manufactured identities revealed their emptiness, their inability to satisfy the deep hunger for authentic being that lives at your core. There is grief in this recognition, real profound mourning for the versions of yourself you thought you needed to be. These personas were not merely lies. They were survival strategies, ways of navigating a world that seemed to demand performance over presence. You feel tenderness for the frightened child within who created these elaborate masks, believing that the real you was somehow not enough. But as the false selves crumble, something extraordinary emerges from the ruins. Beneath the carefully constructed performances, you discover aspects of yourself that have been waiting patiently in the wings, parts of your being that are wild, unpredictable, gloriously imperfect, and utterly real. These are not the sanitized versions you presented to the world, but the raw, unedited expressions of your soul's true nature. The audience you have been performing for begins to reveal itself as the grandest illusion of all. You realize that most of the people you thought were watching and judging were too busy performing their own elaborate shows to notice your authentic self anyway. The stage you believed you were standing on dissolves, and you find yourself not falling, but finally touching solid ground, the earth of your own being in this sacred death. You discover that the performing self was never who you truly were, but merely a collection of strategies for avoiding the vulnerable beauty of being genuinely seen. As these masks fall away, you feel simultaneously naked and clothed in something far more magnificent than any persona could provide: the simple, radical presence of your authentic self. In the sacred chamber of self-acceptance, you encounter the figure you have spent a lifetime running from your own shadow, standing patient and whole in the darkness you once feared to enter. This is not the demon your ego imagined, but the dark twin who has been waiting to complete the circle of your becoming. What you discover in this meeting will forever change how you move through the world. For you realize that the parts of yourself you have hidden from others' judgment are not your weakness, but your untapped power. The shadow carries everything. You were taught to exile your anger that was called inappropriate, your desires that were deemed too much, your wild creativity that didn't fit the acceptable molds, your fierce boundaries that were labeled selfish. These aspects of your being have lived in the underground chambers of your psyche, growing stronger in the darkness, waiting for the moment when you would be brave enough to reclaim them. Jung understood that integration, not elimination, is the path to wholeness. You cannot heal what you refuse to feel, cannot transform what you will not acknowledge, cannot love what you continue to reject within yourself. The shadow does not ask for permission to exist, it simply is, and in its patient presence, you begin to understand that authenticity includes the full spectrum of your human experience. This meeting feels like a homecoming. Two parts of yourself you had forgotten existed: the rebellious spirit that questions authority, the fierce protector that says no without apology, the sensual being that celebrates pleasure without shame, the angry one who refuses to accept injustice. These are not monsters to be slain, but allies to be embraced, aspects of your wholeness that have been waiting in exile for your recognition. As you extend your hand toward these shadow aspects, something profound shifts in your relationship with external validation. When you no longer fear your own darkness, you cease needing others to confirm your light. The desperate hunger for approval dissolves because you recognize that those who cannot accept your full humanity, light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, wisdom and foolishness are not your people anyway. The integration of the shadow brings unexpected gifts. Your creativity becomes more vibrant because you are no longer censoring the wild, untamed aspects of your imagination. Your relationships deepen because you are no longer hiding parts of yourself that need love and acceptance. Your personal power grows because you have access to the full range of your emotional and psychological resources. You begin to understand that the very traits you once suppressed to gain others' approval were often the most authentic expressions of your souls. Nature, the intensity that was called too much, the sensitivity that was labeled weakness, the nonconformity that was seen as rebellious. These were not flaws to be corrected, but treasures to be reclaimed. In embracing your shadow, you discover that wholeness is not about becoming perfect, but about becoming complete. You are no longer a half-person seeking validation to fill the missing pieces, but a full human being who contains multitudes, capable of both gentleness and fierceness, wisdom and folly, light and darkness. This completeness makes you unshakable in your sense of self, for you know that you are already everything you need to be. The scaffolding begins to crumble, not with violence, but with the gentle inevitability of structures that were never meant to support the weight of an authentic life. You watch with a mixture of terror and wonder as the elaborate framework of who you thought you should be collapses piece by piece, revealing that beneath the borrowed blueprints of others' expectations, you have been building something entirely different, something that was always meant to be uniquely, irreplaceably yours. This is Enantiodromia in its purest form, in understanding that everything eventually swings toward its opposite, that dependence must give way to sovereignty, that the borrowed must return to its source so the authentic can finally emerge. The identity you constructed from fragments of others' dreams, expectations, and projections reveals itself as a house built on borrowed land. And now the true owner of your soul is demanding its territory back. You feel it first as a profound disorientation, as though you have been living in a foreign country and suddenly realize you have forgotten your native tongue. The values that once seemed so important, success as others defined it, beauty according to cultural standards, achievements that impressed but never truly satisfied, begin to feel like clothes that belong to someone else entirely. You are not losing yourself. You are finally admitting that much of what you thought was you was actually an elaborate costume party where you forgot you came in disguise. The borrowed identity fights for its survival with the desperation of something that knows its time has ended. It whispers seductive promises about the safety of conformity, the comfort of fitting in, the terrible vulnerability of standing naked in your own truth. It shows you images of rejection, abandonment, the loneliness that surely awaits those who dare to be themselves in a world that seems to reward only careful imitation. But something deeper than fear is awakening within you, a recognition so profound it silences all the ego's protests. You begin to understand that the very experiences that taught you to hide your authentic self were also preparing you for this moment of reclamation. Every time you contorted yourself to fit someone else's idea of who you should be, you were learning the precise shape of what you are not. mapping the boundaries of your true nature through the painful geography of what feels false. The collapse feels like death because in many ways it is the death of the provisional self, the placeholder identity that kept you safe while your true self was still forming in the hidden chambers of your psyche. As the borrowed clothes fall away, you stand momentarily naked in the vast space of possibility, feeling both infinitely vulnerable and strangely invincible in this sacred stripping away. You discover that authenticity is not something you create, but something you uncover. Beneath all the borrowed dreams and inherited expectations, your true nature has been waiting with infinite patience, like a seed that has spent years in darkness, finally sensing the approach of spring. The identity that emerges from this collapse is not new, but ancient, the original self you were before the world taught you to be someone else. This return to essence feels simultaneously like coming home and stepping into unknown territory. For you are meeting yourself perhaps for the first time without the mediating influence of others. Visions of who you ought to be within the crucible of your chest. Something extraordinary ignites an inner furnace that transforms the base metal of external seeking into the pure gold of self-recognition. This is the alchemical fire that the ancient mystics spoke of, the sacred flame that burns away everything that is not essentially you, while refining what remains into something precious beyond measure. You feel it first as a warmth that spreads from your heart outward, a gentle heat that whispers the radical truth. You are your own first witness, your own primary source of validation. This fire does not burn with the desperate hunger of ego need, but with the steady, sure flame of self-knowledge. It is not the narcissistic love that seeks mirrors in others, but the profound self-compassion that Jung understood as the foundation of all authentic relationship. To witness yourself with kindness, to approve of your own becoming, to validate your own experience. This is not selfishness, but the sacred duty of a soul committed to its own. Individuation. The transformation begins in the smallest moments. You notice that when you accomplish something meaningful, you no longer immediately reach for your phone to share it with others for their approval. Instead, you pause and feel the satisfaction settling into your bones like golden honey, savoring the pure sweetness of personal recognition. This is not because others' joy doesn't matter, but because you have finally learned to taste your own victories before offering them to the world. The alchemical process reveals itself in how you respond to criticism and praise alike. Where once harsh words could send you spiraling into self-doubt, now they pass through you like weather, acknowledged but not absorbed into your sense of self. Similarly, praise, while pleasant, no longer inflates you with temporary worth, for you have discovered a more stable source of value that doesn't fluctuate with others' opinions. You begin to understand that the validation you sought from others was always meant to be a practice you developed within yourself. Like learning to walk, you needed external support in the beginning, but now you discover the profound liberation of standing on your own recognition. This inner witness becomes your most trusted companion, celebrating your growth, acknowledging your struggles, holding space for your full humanity without judgment or condition. The fire burns away the old patterns of seeking approval through achievement, appearance, or performance. In that place, something far more sustainable emerges, the quiet confidence of someone who knows their own worth, not because they have convinced others of it, but because they have learned to see themselves clearly and love what they see, shadows and lights together. This is not the brittle armor of false confidence, but the flexible strength of authentic self-regard. You become like a tree that has learned to draw its nutrients from its own deep roots, rather than depending entirely on whatever rain might fall from others' approval. The external nourishment still matters, still brings joy and connection, but it is no longer your primary source of survival. In the secret garden of your heart, you tend the flame of self-validation with the same care you once spent seeking others' approval. You water it with honest self-reflection, feed it with compassionate self-talk, protect it from the winds of external judgment. And slowly, surely, it grows into a light so steady that others begin to warm themselves by its glow. A profound quiet settles over your interactions, like snow falling on ancient ground, not the silence of withdrawal or defeat, but the pregnant pause of one who has learned that presence speaks louder than performance. This is the silence of someone who no longer needs to fill every space with proof of their worth, who understands that the most powerful communication often happens in the spaces between words, in the depth of listening, in the courage to let others encounter the unadorned truth of who you are. You feel it first in conversations, where you once would have rushed to impress, elaborate, or justify. Now there is a spaciousness, a willingness to let your words land and breathe, rather than piling them upon each other like anxious birds seeking shelter. Each phrase emerges not from the desperate need to be seen, but from the quiet confidence of someone who trusts that their authentic expression is enough. Especially when it is simple, unpolished, real. This silence carries weight, because it is full rather than empty. It is pregnant with self-knowledge, heavy with the wisdom of someone who has learned to listen to their own inner voice before speaking to the world. The compulsive need to explain yourself, to provide context for every emotion, to justify every boundary, begins to dissolve like salt in warm water, leaving behind something pure and unadorned. Others begin to notice this shift, though they may not be able to name what has changed. Your presence becomes more magnetic, not because you are performing more intensely, but because you are present more completely. The nervous energy that once drove you to constant verbal motion has been replaced by something far more powerful. Grounded stillness of someone who knows their own worth and doesn't need to prove it every moment. In this sacred silence, you discover that you have been speaking a foreign language for years. The language of insecurity, of constant self-promotion, of anxious overshare. Now you remember your native tongue, the quiet dialect of authenticity, where every word carries the weight of truth, where silence itself becomes a form of communication that says, I am here, I am whole, I am enough. The transformation extends beyond words into the realm of presence itself. You notice how differently you occupy space, no longer shrinking to make others comfortable or expanding to demand attention, but simply inhabiting your own body with the natural authority of someone who belongs exactly where they are. Your silence becomes a gift you offer to others, creating space for them to fill with their own authentic expression rather than competing for the conversational spotlight. This is not the silence of the wounded or withdrawn, but the pregnant quiet of deep waters, like a mountain lake that reflects the sky not because it strives to do so, but because it is still enough to provide a perfect mirror. Your presence begins to offer others something they rarely receive, the space to be seen and heard without judgment, without the pressure to perform, without the need to earn their HT2 exist. In this profound quiet, you discover that the most intimate conversations happen not when you are speaking about yourself, but when you are present enough to truly listen, creating sacred space where authentic connection can finally take root and flourish. Like the butterfly in its transformative cocoon, you begin to cherish the protective membrane of solitude, not as exile from the world, but as sacred preparation for a more authentic form of engagement. This is not the isolation of the wounded, running from connection out of fear, but the conscious choice of a soul that recognizes some transformations can only occur in the holy darkness of your own company. Within this chrysalis, away from the constant noise of others' expectations and opinions, you feel your true nature crystallizing like stars forming in the vast quiet of space. The solitude calls to you with increasing urgency, not as escape, but as necessity. You find yourself declining invitations that once seemed mandatory, creating boundaries around your time and energy that would have felt selfish in your former life, but now feel as natural as breathing. This is not because you love others less, but because you are finally learning to love yourself enough to give your transformation the space it requires. In these quiet chambers, something profound occurs that could never happen in the presence of others' watchful eyes. The deepest layers of your conditioning begin to unravel. The most ancient patterns of seeking approval start to dissolve, and underneath it all, your original essence begins to remember its own shape. Like clay that has been molded by countless hands, you are finally returning to the potter's wheel of your own becoming, allowing your authentic form to emerge without the distortion of external pressure. The solitude teaches you the difference between loneliness and aloneness. Loneliness is the ego's cry for external validation, the desperate hunger for someone else to confirm your existence. But aloneness, this sacred aloneness, is the soul's recognition that you are complete unto yourself, that your own company is not just tolerable but nourishing, not just bearable but beautiful. Within this protective cocoon, you discover aspects of yourself that have been waiting patiently for privacy to reveal themselves. The parts of you that are too tender, too wild, too authentic to show the world until they have fully formed, like seeds that germinate in darkness before reaching toward light. These hidden dimensions of your being require the safety of solitude to develop their full strength and beauty. The transformation happening within this chrysalis is invisible to the outside world, and this privacy becomes precious beyond measure. You are no longer performing your growth for others' approval or seeking validation for the changes occurring within you. The metamorphosis is yours, alone, intimate, sacred, unhurried by others' timelines or expectations. Others may not understand. This withdrawal may interpret your need for solitude as rejection or antisocial behavior, but you are learning to trust the wisdom of your own rhythms, to honor the timing of your own becoming. The butterfly does not emerge from its chrysalis because others are impatient for its beauty, but because its transformation is finally complete. In this sacred solitude, you discover that the company you've been seeking all along was your own, not the anxious, approval-seeking version of yourself, but the deep, authentic self that has been waiting through all your years of external searching to finally be met, known, and loved by the only person who could never abandon you. Yourself, the compulsive searching in others' eyes for confirmation of your existence, begins to fade like a dream upon waking. And with this fading comes a liberation so profound it feels like stepping out of a hole of mirrors you didn't realize you'd been trapped within. For so long, you have lived as a reflection, constantly adjusting your image based on what you thought others wanted to see, dimming your light when it seemed too bright, contorting your essence to fit the curved surfaces of their expectations. But now, the mirror's spell is breaking, and you are finally ready to see yourself directly. This breaking feels both terrifying and exhilarating, Terrifying because you must now encounter the raw truth of who you are without the mediating comfort of others' interpretations. Exhilarating because what you discover in this direct seeing is finally, undeniably real. You realize that the mirrors you have been consulting were never true reflectors anyway, but funhouse distortions that showed you fragments and phantoms, never the whole picture of your magnificent complexity. The addiction to external reflection runs deeper than you first understood. It lived in the way you scanned faces for approval after sharing an idea, the way you measured your worth by likes and comments, the way you shaped your opinions to match the room's energy rather than your own truth. Each glance toward others for validation was a small abandonment of yourself, a vote of no confidence in your own inner knowing. As the spell dissolves, you begin to notice how exhausting it has been to live as a reflection. The constant calibration, the endless adjustment, the anxious monitoring of others' responses to determine your own value. It has been like trying to navigate by a compass that points in every direction except toward your true north. You feel the relief of a traveler who finally stops looking at broken instruments and learns to navigate by the stars. The world becomes simultaneously more honest and more forgiving when you stop seeking your reflection in it. Others' opinions lose their power to devastate or inflate you because you recognize them for what they are: perspectives filtered through their own experiences, projections colored by their own unhealed wounds, mirrors clouded by their own fears and desires. This recognition brings not cynicism but compassion, not withdrawal but deeper connection. In place of the broken mirrors, you discover the clear, still pool of self-reflection. This inner mirror shows you not what others want to see, but what is actually there: your strength and your vulnerability, your wisdom and your foolishness, your light and your shadow in perfect, unedited clarity. It reflects without judgment, reveals without shame, witnesses without the need to change or fix or improve what it sees. The spell's breaking marks a crucial threshold in your individuation. You are no longer a character in other stories about who you should be, but the author of your own narrative. The validation you once sought in their eyes, you now find in the steady, loving gaze you turn toward yourself, a gaze that sees clearly, loves completely, and reflects back the truth of your infinite worth in the inner temple of your being. A mystical wedding takes place not between you and another, but between the seemingly contradictory aspects of your own soul. This is the sacred marriage Jung spoke of, the Hyros Gamos, where your human need for connection unites with your divine need for autonomy, where your longing to be loved meets your requirement to be free, where your desire to belong dances in perfect harmony with your need to be authentically yourself. This union happens quietly, without ceremony or witness, in the depths of your psyche where the most profound transformations always occur. You feel it as a settling, a coming home to yourself that makes you simultaneously more available for genuine relationship and more content in your own company. The desperate either-or that once tormented you, connection or independence, love or freedom, belonging or authenticity, dissolves into a both-and that encompasses the full paradox of human existence. The marriage produces not loneliness, but a profound self-companionship that changes everything about how you approach others. You no longer enter relationships as a half-person seeking completion, but as a whole being choosing to share your completeness. The frantic energy of trying to merge with others to fill the gaps in yourself transforms into the graceful dance of two sovereign souls choosing to move together while maintaining their individual rhythm. This internal union manifests in the most ordinary moments. You notice that you can be alone without the old ache of incompleteness, can enjoy your own thoughts and company without needing constant external stimulation or validation. Simultaneously, you find yourself more present in relationships because you are no longer desperately grasping for what you think you lack, but freely offering what you abundantly possess. The sacred marriage teaches you that love is not about finding someone to complete you, but about becoming so complete within yourself that you can love others for who they are rather than for what they provide. This shift creates space for authentic intimacy to flourish, for when you are no longer using others to fill internal voids, you can finally see them clearly, love them freely, connect with them genuinely. Within this inner temple, you discover that the masculine and feminine aspects of your psyche, regardless of your gender, have found their proper relationship. The assertive and receptive, the doing and being, the speaking and listening, the protecting and nurturing energies within you achieve a dynamic balance that makes you whole unto yourself, while enhancing your capacity for authentic relationship with others. The marriage vows you speak in this sacred ceremony are promises to yourself to honor both your need for connection and your need for solitude, to respect both your desire to give and your right to receive, to cherish both your strength and your vulnerability. These internal vows create a foundation so solid that external relationships can build upon it, rather than trying to substitute for it. In this mystical union, you become both lover and beloved to yourself, both protector and protected, both teacher and student in the ongoing curriculum of your own becoming. This is not narcissism, but its opposite, the mature self-love that makes genuine love of others finally possible. Each rejection, each moment of being misunderstood, each instance when others fail to see your worth, transforms from poison into medicine through the mysterious alchemy of inner acceptance. What once felt like devastating proof of your inadequacy now reveals itself as precious information about the limitations of others' perception, the boundaries of their capacity, the narrow windows through which they view the world. In this profound reframing, disappointment becomes your teacher, and every wound becomes a doorway to deeper wisdom. The alchemical process begins when you stop taking others' inability to appreciate you as evidence of your unworthiness and stop recognizing it as a reflection of their own inner landscape. The colleague who dismisses your ideas may be threatened by innovation. The friend who cannot celebrate your success may be drowning in their own feelings of inadequacy. The family member who criticizes your choices may be mourning the courage they never found to make their own authentic decisions. This understanding does not come from intellectual analysis, but from the deep knowing that arises when you have finally learned to see yourself clearly. From this place of inner clarity, you recognize that others' judgments say far more about their wounds than about your worth. The projection becomes visible, how people cast their own unlived lives, unhealed traumas, and unacknowledged shadows onto the screen of your existence. The medicine hidden within disappointment is compassion, not the weak sympathy that excuses harmful behavior, but the strong compassion that sees clearly while loving anyway. You begin to understand that those who wound you are often wounded themselves, that those who cannot validate you are usually struggling to validate themselves, that those who reject your authenticity are frequently terrified of their own. This alchemical transformation dissolves the old pattern of taking others' responses personally. When someone cannot meet you in your depth, you no longer assume you are too deep. When someone cannot appreciate your sensitivity, you no longer believe you are too sensitive. When someone cannot handle your intensity, you no longer conclude You are too much. Instead, you recognize these as simple incompatibilities, mismatches in capacity rather than verdicts on your value. The acid of universal love burns away the ego's need to be understood by everyone, approved of by all, validated by every person you encounter. In its place grows a discerning wisdom that recognizes your true tribe, those rare souls who can meet you in your fullness, who celebrate rather than diminish your authentic expression, who add to rather than subtract from your sense of self. Each disappointment becomes a gift that teaches you more about your own resilience, your capacity to love yourself when others cannot, your ability to stand in your truth even when it stands alone. The rejection that once felt like exile reveals itself as a redirection toward those who can truly see and appreciate the gift of your authentic being. In this sacred alchemy, you discover that the approval of those who cannot love your whole self-light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, brilliance and bewilderment was never worth having anyway. The disappointment liberates you from the exhausting project of trying to be acceptable to everyone and frees you to be magnificent. For those who have eyes to see